Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. Daniel Dubois will face Romanian Razvan Cojanu on December 15th in the United Kingdom at the Brentwood Centre. That's a leisure centre of some form. So this is Dubois' 10th pro fight. Razvan Cojanu is a 31-year-old. He's got 16 wins, 4 defeats, former world title challenger. I actually really like this fight in terms of, Dubois' development. I know some people from what I've seen on social media aren't so high on this fight. They're just kind of like, oh, Razvan Cojanu, he's a bum. But I actually think Razvan Cojanu at this stage of Dubois' career when, limited amateur experience, he's 21 years old, it's his 10th pro fight, this is a very good fight in my view because, it is a minor step up in terms of his last opponent, Kevin Johnson. Johnson a bit more faded than Cojanu, but Cojanu offers something a little bit different. He is, 6'7". He's more of the size that some of the guys Dubois will come up against at the top end of the division. And I'm not saying that Cojanu is a top tier guy because he's not. He's only ever been a fringe contender at best, and he had a late stand-in shot for a title against Joseph Parker. That was when Hughie Fury pulled out of Joseph Parker's fight in Auckland in 2017. Cojanu was the man on the spot. He took the opportunity at late notice, but he came up short in that one. And actually, that was a really dreadful fight because Parker and Cojanu, they knew each other well. Cojanu was Parker's sparring partner, or one of his main sparring partners for a couple of camps, including that camp for Hughie Fury. So the styles didn't gel. Cojanu uber negative, and really it was an unflattering performance for Joseph Parker. It didn't really rock Razvan Cojanu. And depending on what happens in this fight, Cojanu, he could try to pull out some of the negative tactics, the sparring partner routine that he showed in that fight for Dubois, because I imagine Cojanu will be well aware of the power that Daniel Dubois possesses, and he may try to tuck up and try to avoid some of those, some of that dynamite that Dubois has in his hands. And he will try to potentially do what Kevin Johnson did, try to, be negative, try to take the fight later on and see if he has a better chance later in the fight. Because Dubois, for all, the sort of beating that he did put on Kevin Johnson a few months ago, it wasn't exactly the sparkling performance in terms of, it was kind of all the same. The sort of first couple of rounds and you saw the fight. You knew, what was going to happen for the rest of the fight because it was all the same. He didn't really change gears. He didn't really show us much different, as he tried to get Johnson out of there. But all the same, it was a good performance by Dubois, perhaps just a little bit one-paced. But Razvan Cojanu, obviously 31 years old, he's had a decent career at heavyweight in terms of what he's been able to do. But in terms of can he beat Daniel Dubois, I would actually say no. I think there's a reason they've called him in here. And actually, Cojanu's making a habit of this. He's been a late stand-in opponent 3 fights in a row now. For the Parker one, that was at, 10 or 12 days' notice. He was a late stand-in opponent for Luis Ortiz, and he lost that one as well. He was actually, knocked out in the second round, and that was a very good performance by Luis Ortiz. Straight left down the pipe, just, had Cojanu just all over the place, didn't know where he was, tried to get up, couldn't, and, the ref waved it off. And obviously Cojanu, who wasn't happy with it, but I think that was a pretty good stoppage. And now we're 3 weeks out from fight night, December 15th, and Cojanu has stepped in again. So you'd imagine he probably hasn't taken this fight without getting a tidy little payday. But in terms of, we'll get to the press release really quickly just for what they're saying and the quotes. So it says 21-year-old heavyweight prospect Daniel Dubois will fight former world title challenger Razvan Cojanu on December 15th at the Brentwood Centre live on BT Sport. Dubois, 9-0, got taken the distance for the first time as a professional in October when American heavyweight veteran Kevin Kingpin Johnson managed to survive a one-sided 10-round beating. Next up for Dubois is American-based Romanian Razvan Cojanu. The 31-year-old has 16 victories to his name and just 4 defeats. One of those defeats coming on points against New Zealander Joseph Parker for his WBO World Heavyweight strap in May 2017. Razvan will be the second former world title challenger Dubois will have faced so far in his young boxing career to date, this just being his 10th outing as a professional. And now we move into some quotes from Daniel Dubois. Razvan is a good fighter who has been fighting at world level for the last couple of years. It's another step up in the level of opponent, and I'm looking forward to getting in the ring on December 15th and topping the bill in Brentwood. Kevin showed how durable he is in my last fight, and I got 10 good rounds in the bag from my fight. I went the distance and felt good from it. I enjoyed the experience, and it will only help me become a better and stronger fighter going forward. And the rest of the press release here is it's undercard information and such. There'll be Bradley Skeet, a few others. Anyway, Razvan Cojanu, Daniel Dubois. I do like the fight. I think in terms of Daniel Dubois' development, it's a good piece of matchmaking here, because he will beat Razvan Cojanu, but Razvan Cojanu may be able to take in some rounds. It sort of depends, how sturdy will be Razvan Cojanu's defense here, because if he can manage to be in the sort of mold that he was against Joseph Parker, he was very negative, he was able to sort of survive, well, he might be able to take Daniel Dubois some rounds like Kevin Johnson was. But if he ends up getting caught with a big shot like he did against Luis Ortiz, well, Dubois, he may get him out of there early as well. So, I could sort of see, any of those sort of possibilities sort of panning out. Cojanu, he does have the, wherewithal to go the distance if his game plan, if he's on point there with, the way that he fights. But, he's just a bit too low output on offense to really string anything together to trouble Dubois. So this is a fight, a good piece of matchmaking where Dubois, he will get the win, and most likely, in my view, I think it will be a stoppage, maybe somewhere in the sort of round 2, 3, 4, potentially that sort of area of the fight. But I wouldn't be surprised if Cojanu can make Dubois work for a bit and maybe make it a bit more frustrating than Dubois would otherwise like it to be. But in terms of Dubois and his career so far, so this is his 10th fight. So if he comes through this, if he wins, he's, 10 fights in the bag. 2 of them would have been against opposition that was, former world title challengers. And for a guy that's 21 and, having a guy like Cojanu and a guy like Kevin Johnson on the resume, that's actually not a bad looking resume for someone so green, someone who needs more seasoning before he really reaches the top level. But this is the sort of fight to help him get some more experience. Obviously he's going to get a few different looks from Cojanu being a bit taller. Dubois will not have the reach advantage. He won't be the bigger man in there. So it's going to be, it's going to offer something a little bit different to some of the other fights that he has had earlier in his career. But, I actually think in terms of the year as a whole, because if we look at this, what he entered the year here, at 6-0. And in 2018, he's fought D.L. Jones, he's fought Tom Little, Kevin Johnson, and Razvan Cojanu. Actually, it probably would have been a little bit, I would have liked to have seen Dubois maybe out one more time, maybe 5 times this year, because the level of opposition, D.L. Jones and Tom Little, there was a big break between drinks between those fights, and then also up until the Kevin Johnson fights. Potentially, he should have maybe had a couple more fights in there, squeezed them in there. And I know that there's a lot of demand from people to see Dubois in a really big fight, but I just don't think he's ready. I don't think he's ready. He's only 21 years old. He's going to be 10-0 after this fight because he is going to win this. What's the rush? I know it's, there's a lot of expectation about what he may be able to do in the division. But really, with everything that's going on in the, in terms of what's happening at the top end of the division, there is no rush for Dubois. He can make his way. He can work his way up. So I wouldn't mind seeing another 12 to 18 months of him getting some more build-up fights and getting some more seasoning. Just because if he is rushed, he could come a cropper. I mean, as it is, you look at this, he's 8th of 43 heavyweights in, the UK at the moment anyway. So I don't think there is any rush. They're going to keep wheeling him out against guys potentially for the next sort of 6 to 12 months, the level of Razvan Cojanu, the level of Kevin Johnson. We're going to see more of that. Guys who have, potentially on the downside. I could potentially see Dubois in the next year, pitted against guys like Marius Wackle, potentially, Johan Dubois. Effectively some of the guys that Jarrell Miller has been facing at a much more advanced stage of Miller's career. And I actually thought it was good that he was taken the 10 rounds by Kevin Johnson recently, just because there was so much hype that was sort of feeding into Daniel Dubois' career. It was starting to actually outstrip, his actual development. And when he was taken the full 10, there were a lot of people who were disappointed and sort of saying, oh, Daniel Dubois, he's a hype job and all sorts of carry on. But in reality, he's a guy who is still making his way in the division. He's not going to be, look $1 million every fight. He's still working his way through, how to become a pro in terms of, advancing, on the rungs on the ladder. And that's going to take time. It's not just going to, you can't just click your fingers and it's going to happen. And this is why they're starting to slowly work him through the levels. Because a year ago, he's facing guys like, Marcus Kelly, David Howe, AJ Carter. And then a year on, he's facing Kevin Johnson, Tom Little, Razvan Cojanu. There is progression. And there will continue to be progression. And I'm not actually, that torn up about the fact that Frank Warren has come out publicly and said that he doesn't want to make the Nathan Gorman and Daniel Dubois fight right now. Because I actually think, both of them need a bit more development. I wouldn't mind seeing that fight, but, I can understand why Frank Warren doesn't want to make it. Although, Frank Warren has said he did want to see a stadium fight by the end of next year. So the British Boxing Board of Control had ordered the fight between Gorman and Dubois to happen by March. But Frank Warren has said no, and they should have asked him, and they should have actually called him and spoken to him, all this sort of carry on. But in the same breath, he's previously said, he wouldn't mind seeing them fighting in a stadium in a year's time. I mean, what's the difference of 6 months? I mean, really, I think that fight, if Warren wants to make it a stadium fight of any note, it's 2 years away at least. And by then, both are probably going to be, 18-0, 20-0, 22-0, something like that. They will be the next wave coming through, they've actually reached contender level. I mean, sometimes these prospect level fights between two guys, same stable, they can be really good fights. I mean, we've seen some good fights recently that have been made in other divisions where guys have sort of been on the come up and, they fought each other at an early stage. They've been, 10-0, 15-0, somewhere around that, and it hasn't hurt their career. But in terms of Dubois' development right now, I actually just think he's a little green. I mean, Gorman may beat him, but I mean, who knows? But I think Dubois needs a bit more. What do you make of it all? Drop a comment, loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.